Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back again, bringing you the 7.3 Mythic Plus Discipline Guide. Everything you need to know about conquering Mythic Plus dungeons, mid, low, high keys as a Discipline Priest. Starting off, Discipline Priest, quick rundown, is of course a very proactive healer and has a very proactive focus when you're in raiding. Even more so in Mythic Plus because you are the only healer in the group. A lot of your healing is going to come down to how well you're preparing your atonements ahead of time, and not necessarily healing through atonement. While it is preferred because of Disc's playstyle, where they're able to deal damage to heal, it is very much preferred to be doing lots of healing through atonement when possible. In Mythic Plus, you'll often find that a lot of times the damage will be too high to heal up with atonement alone, so that's why you'll be taking other modifiers to actually increase your direct single target, and often single target healing, in order to make it a little bit easier to get everyone topped off. So in many cases, you will kind of switch gears and have a hybrid of directly healing people and healing people through atonement, and their talents are going to reflect that. So on your screen right now is the general setup that you're going to be having, of course, for your Mythic Plus dungeons. Now, first row, and we're going to get to this a little bit later when we talk about legendaries, but there's a legendary, of course, that will allow you to take 2 of the 15 tier. So you could have Twist of Fate and Castigation. If you do not have it, the priority, I would say, especially as you're getting the higher keys, is to take Twist of Fate over Castigation. But if you can get both with the Legendary Ring, excellent, excellent, excellent. In terms of mobility, Feather is just super nice. You could use Masochism for the extra damage reduction, but you just have to kind of weigh that depending on the dungeons. As you get into higher keys, more damage reduction is always going to be very helpful because Priests can be pretty squishy. So kind of play that by ear. Shining Force, especially in Sanguine weeks, but overall it's just a very, very nice ability to be able to have. Can give you some space in case there's, unexpected wipes, or in case, some boss mechanics or something like that will require pushing an ad into a certain mechanic or pushing it away from your group. It can be very useful and it's just very flexible overall. So as a default pick, take Shining Force. In terms of mana mechanics, next tier, Mindbender, because generally you're going to be able to sit and drink all the time, so you're really not worried about your mana regen out of like Shield Discipline or Powered Solace. So Mindbender is the one to go for. It's also very nice as you're encountering trash mobs. You'll be able to just drop your Mindbender in there, and as you are healing people, it's still doing damage as long as you have atonements out and things like that. So you're dealing damage with your Mindbender passively, you're getting some little bit extra healing out of it, and it can allow you to have that little bit of extra oomph, especially when you're going into harder bosses. Purge the Wicked, of course, Shadow Covenant is generally the preferred talent that you'll be taking, especially in like bursting weeks. But you also have to look at what instance that you're going to be running. Sometimes Clarity of Will is going to have a very, very big impact, and we're going to talk about that in just a sec. So those two talents together, you really have to kind of play it by ear into what instance that you're going after. Like I said, during bursting weeks, which is at the time of this video where we're in right now, Shadow Covenant is really, really useful, especially when you compare it with the last talents, which we'll get to in just a sec. So, of course, Purge the Wicked deals tons of damage. You're able to spread it via penance, and overall it's very cheap. It's very easy to take advantage of. Last tier here, Grace. Of course, when you have Atonement on targets, your direct non-Atonement healing is, of course, increased. All right, so that is going to include Shadow Covenant. That's going to include Clarity of Will. It's going to include Shadow Mend as well. So this is what I'm talking about, where you kind of have that hybrid of, yes, you want to be healing with Atonement when possible, but as you're going to be seeing in this video, of course, many times I have to stop healing via Atonement and actually start direct healing people with Shadow Mends, sometimes a direct penance if they need lots and lots of healing. You have all these different things that you're taking advantage of the extra healing you're getting out of Grace and having that much more of an impact, right? So going into Shadow Covenant versus Clarity of Will. This is kind of more instance by instance. You have to look at certain criteria and how annoying or how lethal that they can be, right? So for example, when you're in, say, Eye of Ashara right here, you don't have too many mechanics that are very large single target bursts on you. So you're a little bit less worried about having larger shields on yourself. If you get yourself just one powered shield, usually that's enough to survive a lot of the boss mechanics that may come after you. I mean, there is some one-shots in, for example, Eye of Ashara. You just make sure you don't get hit by one-shots, right? The point of Clarity of Will is to be able to give you enough of a buffer zone that you can really survive heavier damage than you otherwise would be able to, because in terms of defensives, you kind of just have your fade damage reduction, and from there you're kind of looking into raid cooldown with barrier, or a tank cooldown with pain suppression. And sometimes it's good to use those for yourself, to keep yourself alive, but in general you have to be looking at when you can use it further down the road, if it's going to be more beneficial on a tank, or if you can actually get away with using it on yourself for, say, exceptionally lethal trash mobs, something like that. So something to kind of keep in mind. I would definitely say as you're going into keys like Black or Cold, for example, it's very easy for the mobs to switch targets onto you. You know, that's one area where you may want to say, hey, I want to be taking Clarity of Will here. Whereas if you're in, you know, most bursting instances, you're going to have party-wide damage going on everybody, and you want to make sure you're keeping people alive enough. And that's what Shadow Covenant does. And Shadow Covenant is basically a buffer heal, where you don't want to be just spamming it, you don't want to be using it super aggressively, but when, you know, you're pulling trash mobs, all the mobs die really close together, get Atonement out on everybody, and then you're using a couple of Shadow Covenants to keep people alive just enough until you can get into the next trash mob, or until people can eat and get themselves topped off. So it'll give you enough HP in order to keep people alive, but it's not what I would call a primary heal, because of course the healing absorb that you have to chew through and things like that is very, very annoying to deal with later on. But because it's such a short duration, usually what you're able to do is, you know, hit a Shadow Covenant a couple times near the end of trash mobs as they're all dying, get enough HP to keep everybody alive, and then you're able to move on to the next mobs, and by that time the debuff, the negative effect of Shadow Covenant has already fallen off. Now I was talking about talents, and of course getting 2 of your first 15 tiers. That leads me to what legendaries are best for Mythic Plus. Preferably, and especially for high keys, you know, Pride As is a must-have, and it is just so valuable to have that extra little bit of buffer space. Again, like we're talking about, having a little bit extra absorption, a little bit extra protection, and things like that goes a really long way in Mythic Plus as a Disc Priest here. And it's something that you always want to be able to kind of have available, because there's many mechanics, especially, like I said, going higher and higher, you want to be able to have that extra protection. If you're running lower keys, then you can play a little bit more aggressively with some of the more DPS-oriented legendaries for you. But if we're talking about, you know, pushing higher keys, you know, progressing and things like that, Pride As is going to be the way to go, followed by, of course, Soul of the High Priest. Like we were talking about, Soul of the High Priest will give you the Twist of Fate talent, which will also allow you to take Castigation. So you have both of them at the same time. It's very, very nice, and I love being able to have access to them. Twist of Fate is really awesome talent where, you know, when things go wrong, it gives you that buff. And that's, you know, such an amazing, you know, it's basically like a personal cooldown that every single time things go wrong, every single time somebody's health drops that low, you're able to get extra healing, extra damage in, and that's so valuable, and it carries you so far. Castigation, getting more penance is always nice, whether you're using it to damage an enemy, whether you're using it to heal an ally, it's always valuable, and that's one thing you're always going to be cycling through as you're going through Mythic Plus. Super strong. Last thing before we get into gameplay here, just a quick note about gear. Of course, you're still going to be prioritizing, you know, high intellect, high item level pieces of gear. You know, you're still going to be prioritizing haste. In terms of mastery versus crit, because you're going to be spending more and more time using things like Shadowmen, Shadow Covenant, you know, more direct healing, a little bit less time with Atonement healing. Usually Atonement is like upwards of 60% of your total healing in raids. Not so much in Mythic Plus. It's a little bit away from that. So mastery becomes a little bit less valuable, and crit becomes a little bit more valuable. Now, it's not the end of the world if you have tons and tons of masteries, things like that, but it's something to kind of think about as you're able to better, you know, min-max your trinkets or min-max your rings, things like that, all right? You know, prioritizing int, prioritizing haste. After that, try to get a little bit more crit, more so than mastery in that instance, all right? And then going forward, speaking of trinkets, there's, in terms of what you want to be running, you have a number of options available to you. Because again, like I said, having high stat sticks where they increase your damage dealt via Atonement, and they increase your healing via like Shadowmens and things like that. That's where like int stat sticks can be very valuable, but you also have to look at secondary benefits. So one trinket I always recommend people get, especially if they want to push high keys, is the Deceiver's Grand Design. Off of Kill Jaden, giving you a very, very nice buffer shield whenever somebody drops below 35%. This thing is a lifesaver. It is so helpful, so useful in Mythic Plus dungeons. I would highly recommend getting your hands on that. From there, for me, I can use like the Owl Trinket. There's a number of different damage dealing trinkets if they have enough Warforged, if they have Titan Forge eye level, you know, things like that. You're going after high eye level int stat stick, so an int plus a secondary stat, so you get a big int haste stat stick. If you're getting like a big Arcano crystal, those things are all really valuable, and those are all things to kind of consider when you're looking at your gear. Now, getting into playstyle, what you want to be doing. Now we've talked about all the setup and all the preparation. What you want to be doing in Mythic Plus dungeons is definitely prioritizing Atonement healing when possible, but your highest priority is going to be keeping people alive. So when you're going into these trash packs, you know, you have a number of different situations for what the affixes are you're dealing with. I just made a video, for example, about bursting, and I'm going to be making more specific videos and things like that for specific annoying affixes. But the priority right here is, of course, getting lots of atonements out when there's going to be damage coming out in the group. So if you're going into mob packs that are not going to deal much damage to anybody else but the tank, just keep Powered Shield, keep atonement out on the tank, focus on that, and just start making sure you're spreading your Purge the Wicked dots via penance, or if it's early on, you can just start dotting up all of them before all the mobs start dealing lots of damage. And then from there, you're able to better evaluate, do you need to actually use something like Power of Radiance to get atonement out on everybody. So if you're in a situation where you're able to pull multiple different mobs that are all high health or relatively high health, getting Purge the Wicked rolled around on all of them before they start dealing damage to the entire group. Once they do, you already have 4 or 5 dots that are ticking all at once. You can slam down a Powered Radiance, the entire group has atonement on them, they're getting healed from those 4 or 5 dots, which gives you a nice buffer space that you're able to start dealing lots of damage. This then allows you to deal a lot more damage and does not force you to switch gears into healing yet. What I mean by that is, you inevitably have to use Shadow Mends, you have to use a direct heal penances and things like that, but your goal is always going to be to minimize them when possible. So what you want to be doing is, the better buffer zone that you can create through multiple dots, keeping constant atonement out when you know there's going to be AoE damage, the easier it's going to be for you to deal more damage and better respond to a crisis situation when somebody gets hit twice by an archer in Blackroot Cold, or a pelter in Nelth's Lair hits the same person twice. You're better able to respond to that as a result, right? When you're using certain things like your cooldowns with Rapture, I love using Rapture. It's such a nice thing to lean on. It's something when you're going into a number of trash mobs, again, like the situation we just talked about, where you know that they're going to be dealing lots of damage to the entire group. That's something you can run into the trash pack, get everything dotted up, then you use either like a Powered Radiance to keep people topped, and you Powered Radiance, and you hit Penance, and you have a bunch of dots rolling at once, and you just dealt a bunch of damage, which will turn into healing through Atonement via Penance, and then you're using Rapture after that to make sure that everyone's staying sustained, and you're refreshing all those atonements that you had just applied that are going to be falling off now with Powered Radiance. Those are different options that are available to you, and again, the priority is going to be establishing a buffer zone to keep people alive and allow you to better respond to this. Once that's established, then you're able to deal lots and lots of damage, focus on damage, but then you also have to look at refreshing your atonements and what the situation would require for you to refresh those atonements, right? So if you have a high suspicion of damage constantly going out of the group, and you know atonements are about to fade away, maybe it's time to cast another Powered Radiance, so that if something happens to somebody, then you're not having to worry about applying an atonement, then casting a Shadow Mend, or just casting a really weak Shadow Mend that's not going to be enough to keep them topped off. So spending an extra second before the damage happens can go a really long way. If you're seeing certain mobs that, like I said, Blackroot Cold's archers, you can see where they'll target. So if you have a target of target, like I have with LVY, you're able to see who's actually going to be targeting, which one of your allies there. And that way you're better able to pre-shield, and you're better able to deal with that damage before it even comes out. In terms of boss fights, boss fights, of course, you have to really pace yourself, especially when you're on a tyrannical week. You have to make sure that you're going to be able to have mana left over, which is going to end up meaning sparingly using your Powered Radiance. You don't want to use it too often, and you don't want to be trying to burn your mana down. Smite is something that is extremely mana positive, extremely mana efficient here. So what you're going to be doing is, a lot of times, keeping out the minimum amount of atonements, usually just on the tank, and then whenever you're seeing big damage about to happen, that's where you're better able to respond here. So, when you're looking at Eye of Ashara, when you have the Sea Witch that you're fighting off, that's where you're applying atonement to everybody before the lightning shocks go off, because that's the AoE group-wide damage. But in between, you're just applying atonement to the tank because they're the only one that's actually going to be taking damage, or should be taking damage after the fact. Balancing out applying atonements and still dealing damage, and also keeping everybody alive, is always going to be the challenge of Disc Priest, making the most out of your barriers in order to keep the entire group taking very little damage. Sometimes you might be forced to use Inspiration on the tank, or even on yourself, to avoid certain very, very big hits. It all can be quite fluid in Mythic Plus. The best thing I can advise is, always trying to lean on your personal with Fade. It's not amazing, but it is something. Leaning on that whenever possible, then start scaling up into heavier damage reduction cooldowns, and really planning it out with your tank, planning it out with your group for when they think that they're going to be needing them, right? I hope you guys enjoyed this quick rundown of just the basics and things like that for conquering Mythic Dungeons as Discipline Priest. I've got a lot more videos coming up very soon for you guys, so thank you so much everybody who's been tuning in. Be sure to like, subscribe, share it around if you find it helpful. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you all tomorrow.